As some of you may know, and as is explained in my bio on the church website, I spent 18 years actively avoiding church and apathetically, meaning without much interest, avoiding religion. So actively avoiding church and casually, apathetically avoiding religion in general. Now, I had a lot of reasons for doing this. One of those reasons, just one of many, was that the Bible about which I was informed, or the ways in which the Bible was interpreted to me, was delivered in relatively stark binary terms. Generally, from Sunday school on, definitely through confirmation, everything was in stark black and white terms. This is good, this is bad, this is true, this is false. This is how you were born, this is what you should become. And it was not as though I had grown up in a fundamentalist church or an evangelical church. I grew up in a fairly middle-of-the-road, moderate, mainline United Methodist Church in a town of 10,000 in central Minnesota in the 1970s and 80s. Yet even there, even in a fairly moderate church, certain people, like I said, were 100% good. Think of Joseph. Again, before the kids' sermon we just had. And certain other people were 100% bad. And we could easily point fingers at who was who. There was, pulling from the parable from Matthew, there was good seeds of grain and definite weeds. And the way the Bible was interpreted to me is that you could tell them apart. You could yank the weeds and leave the wheat, which is not what Jesus said. Now, back to Joseph. In my summary, I quoted an Old Testament professor and literature professor, Robert Alter. He has recently come out with a new translation of the Hebrew Bible. It's not dramatically different, but he's taken, he's gone through the linguistics and just come up with some small insights here and there. He described the Joseph story, like I just said, with quirkiness and the tensions of family life. That's what he said. The Joseph saga displays human quirkiness and the tensions that every family has. I left a couple of his other words out of my summary, though, and I want to share those with you right now. In addition to saying quirky and tense, Alter describes Joseph in these ways. Joseph is a spoiled brat. Now, mind you, this is not a kid's sermon. Robert Alter taught at UC Berkeley, Hebrew, and literature. His PhD, I think, came from Columbia. A theologian is using spoiled brat to describe Joseph. Tattletale. He says Joseph is a tattletale. Did you pick up on the tattletale part in the scripture? He gave a report to his father. Well, that's not what tattling is. Could you not imagine Joseph running to tell? For those of you who have kids, how does tattling go? Tattling is like running through the house. Mom, 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 mom. Guess what? Well, Elliot already did it. Guess what? Peter. Joseph gave a report. That makes it sound like Joseph calmly walked up to Jacob and he went, "By the way, Dad, I thought I should give you this report that you asked me to deliver about the brothers and how they're doing out in the field." No, tattletale. Self-absorbed. Robert Alter calls Joseph self-absorbed. And here's my favorite. He suffers from adolescent narcissism. Now we're getting a little more academic. Spoiled brat to adolescent narcissism. He then also says that in sharing his dreams, and if you go back and read that later today, Joseph assumes that his brothers will be fascinated by the details of his dreams. Joseph is completely blind, ignorant. Joseph has no empathy for his brothers. Otherwise, who would tell a dream like that? Which, by the way, we are not yet told that these dreams are from God. We assume that because we know how Joseph ends his life in the service of God. But at this point in the story, especially if we read the Bible as literature, and the Bible was oral to begin with, we don't know. Here's just some young kid getting dreams. Nowhere does it say from God. Now, yes, we can assume that, and I believe that's true. But in the story we don't know, and his brothers for sure do not know. In fact, in one of the dreams, Robert Alter says that Joseph borders on blasphemy. Can Joseph be blasphemous? Can a man of God, and whether or not he's with God right now is hard to tell, be blasphemous? The second dream, the sun and the moon and the stars bow down to God? No. Joseph tells a dream where the celestial beings bow down to me, human Joseph. Yeah, Robert Alter's right. That borders on blasphemy. So with all of that in mind, all of this new personality that's popping up, I want to reread that story with different inflections. I want to see what we think of Joseph. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, even in today, old enough to know better, most assuredly in this time period, old enough to know better. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. Helper. He wasn't in charge. Yes, he was the second youngest. We all get that. 17. Probably old enough to do some real work. Joseph is not doing real work yet. He is only helper. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father, tattletale. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his children. Not Joseph's fault, because he was the son of his old age. Benjamin was even more so. So that sentence there makes no sense. Joseph was the second youngest of his old age. And Jacob made Joseph a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Do you think that Joseph took that coat and put it in the closet? Or do you think he took that coat and then wore it around the house? Showed his brothers. Hey, look what I got. Now once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, listen, hey brothers, listen to this dream sheaves in the field, and suddenly my sheep rose and stood upright, and then your sheaves gathered around my sheep and bowed down to it. And his brothers, of course, said, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us?" So, of course, they hated him more. Did Joseph stop? No. He had another dream. He's going to tell it too. He's going to do the same thing, hoping for a different result. Look, I have had another dream. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. And then, of course, his brothers got mad, his father got mad. The sun and the moon are Jacob and Rachel. But, of course, the brothers all have different mothers. But that's who the figures are. So he's even making his father to bow down to him. If you are a father or if you are a mother, what would you say to your child who came to you and said, "I had this dream where I tell you what to do"? How would that go? Upsetting the apple cart, quite sure. So how does the new Joseph look? Understanding that part of the biblical message is that, yes, we are born into one state. I do not think we are born into a sinful state, but we are born into a human state. An element of humanity is sinfulness. How does a new Joseph become? What does he look like? And yes, he does go through some incredibly hard trials. The overall message, however, is that he goes through life. Now, granted, I am assuming none of us have been sold into slavery by our siblings, as oftentimes as our siblings might want to do that. Or leave us at a gas station or the side of the road. So one time, my sister, we were traveling down to Minneapolis from Grand Rapids, Minnesota, a 4-hour drive at that time. 65 miles an hour was not yet a thing. 55 was the limit. Drive 55, stay flies, I think the slogan was, and gas, nothing else. Now, my sister threw up in the car. She did every time we went in the car ride. She threw up. And this one time, I told my dad, in all seriousness, just leave her on the side of 169. And we'll come back and get her, Dad. So Joseph, obviously a change. I'm sort of happy because my sister's daughter throws up in the car. If you have your Bible open, you can look at chapter 43. We're not specifically going to look at verse by verse, but you can maybe scan as we go along. In previous sermons, we have been doing verse by verses, but this is just going to kind of bring you to where we are. The Joseph story starts in chapter 37. In fact, the Joseph story closes Genesis for us. It's like a capitulation to the previous parts of Genesis. So in chapter 43, starting with verse 26, Joseph serves his brothers a meal of peace. Now, what's very interesting is that, and this is not something I came up with. I will give credit to Scott Dabowski of the Sunday school team. Scott came to me just this morning, and he said that one of the things they would be teaching in Sunday school is this meal. That's why they prepared food today. How did the food turn out? I had one of the meals. Everything was good? The hummus. Raise your hand if you love the hummus.
There's leftover hummus and leftover cookies.
We have leftover. So if you want to try some homemade Sunday school made hummus and cookies, it'll be in the fellowship hall. Okay, so Scott today told me that part of the Sunday school lesson was that the meal that Joseph served to his brothers in the Egyptian court, well, in his own house, but with Egyptians there as well, was a meal of peace beginning the reconciliation process to his brothers, even though they don't yet know who Joseph is. He is still hidden from them. So today I learned something from Sunday school, for which I'm very happy to say none of my Sunday school teachers are here today. I learned next to nothing in actual Sunday school because they were teaching black, white, binary paradigms, which are never true. So in chapter 43, Joseph is beginning this process. If you then turn to chapter 44 and begin at verse 18, Joseph's older brother Judah, I think he's fourth or fifth in line, I can't remember, from the top. Judah was the main bully in the family. But at this point now, it is Judah who comes to the defense of Benjamin, the very, very youngest, when Joseph set them up for a test with the silver cup, if you remember the Joseph story. So Judah is also changing because of his life experiences. And then in chapter 45, Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, and he says in verse 4, this is chapter 45, verse 4, Joseph says, I am your brother. This is the brother, by the way, that you pushed down the well, or the hole in the ground, and then sold off into slavery. Andrew, the Sunday school teacher today, told a good story, which I think I can share because he told it in Sunday school. He was a certain age. He declined to say how old he was. He was pressured by the Sunday school class to say when he did this thing to his own brother. And he did. Cinda said, were you in elementary school? And I think Andrew said, maybe. Sure. And then she said, sure. He said, sure I was. And then Cinda, being quite smart, said, well, sure. Well, then were you in middle school? And Andrew said, sure. Were you in high school? And he was sure. So he neglects to tell how old he was, but he shoved his brother. I'm assuming not down a pit. Shoved his brother. So this is the brother that you shoved into a pit and then got sold off to slavery. And this is the brother that says to you, I am your brother Joseph. Now, in the way in which I just said it, it was very calm. I am your brother Joseph. No, good, perfect Joseph. Joseph could have said, I am your brother Joseph. That strikes fear in my heart of Judah, or Gad, or Naphtali, or Dan, and the other 10, as Benjamin was up there. Chapter 50, the final chapter of Genesis now. Chapter 50, verse 20. This is the famous phrase. You meant it for harm, but God meant it for good. Here's that famous phrase, the very last chapter, very close to the last verses. Joseph says, even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good, in order to preserve a numerous people. No longer an adolescent narcissist. No longer a tattletale. No longer a spoiled brat. So I said that today when we started worship today, I said this is going to be sermon light, L-I-T-E. So here's just the really basic good part. The lesson that we can take away from this reimagined Joseph, a Joseph who comes to us in his full vain glory, with all of his faults exposed, and the Joseph as an adult who has learned forgiveness and reconciliation and humility. From this story, we learn that no person is perfect, no family is perfect. feel imperfect this morning? When you go to bed, do you sometimes go to bed with joy in your heart because today you did good things, said something good to your spouse, were a remarkably good parent? Do you sometimes go to bed maybe not talking to your spouse? You sometimes go to bed with a child who might be crying in their bed because of something you said. God is present in both of those, the good and the bad. The going to bed happy and the going to bed sad. We can assume that the dreams that Joseph had were from God, even though we don't know it from the way the story is told, because we know the ending. And that's the same for us. Going to bed sad, you can trust that God will be there with you, because God knows the ending of our lives. God walks with us. Of course, that phrase has been used 100 times. But I said, it's a sermon light. God walks with us and with our family through all of the frictions, all of the tensions, all of our own narcissistic imperfections. And for that, we could say the same thing that Joseph said. Many of the things that we do to ourselves or to the people we love, we mean for harm. But through forgiveness and reconciliation of ourselves and others, it can be turned around, and your life